Hello and welcome, friends. I hope everybody's had a great day so far. If you are new here, welcome. And if you're back, welcome back. I greatly appreciate all of the ongoing support. This is my channel, Dragonsjewel Creative Gems, and I'm Tegan, and I'm just gonna get all that wonderful YouTubey stuff out of the way first. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, please consider doing so, just down below. If you like the content you see, don't forget to give a like. And of course, any love, comments, suggestions, all those wonderful things, there's a comment section down there as well for all of that. Today we are diving back into the Ghostly Echoes series. We had been working our way through British Columbia, so now we are going east. We're skipping over Alberta because we already did that one, and we are diving into the ghost stories of Saskatchewan. So I hope you guys enjoy these next few spooky tales. This story takes place near Echo Lake, Saskatchewan. Spirits of the Sand. Tuberculosis. They called it the White Plague, and the captain of all the men of death. In this age of antibiotics and AIDS, it is difficult to imagine how a diagnosis of this bacterial infection used to terrify. Until the 1944 discovery of the drug streptomycin. However, thousands of tubercular Canadians every year suffered horrible deaths. Before drug therapy, the weapons medical science had to wield against the disease were few and unimpressive by today's standards. There was bed rest, wholesome food, and plenty of fresh air, no matter how low the thermometer mercury dipped. There were a few crude surgical techniques, and there was isolation. Not for the good of the patient, but to prevent the spread of the disease. To meet all of these needs, sanatoriums, or SANs, as they were often called, sprang up around the country. In Saskatchewan, Fort Sand was the first. Although plans for the Fort Sand began in 1911, it wasn't until the end of the First World War that construction was completed. Many tubercular veterans came home in need of treatment, and this patriotic issue lent appeal to the funding drive. 1919 saw the facility finally open, with returning soldiers occupying over half of the available beds. But if World War I helped build Fort Sand, World War II helped render it obsolete. Out of that conflict came the advent of antibiotics, an effective treatment for tuberculosis. As the quality of the drugs improved, the need for sanatoriums diminished, and eventually, all treatment could be handled in hospitals. In 1972, Fort Sand closed its doors, and the grounds were sold to the provincial government for the princely sum of $1. The joke, according to Gus Vanderpolden, who now manages Echo Valley Conference Center, is that the province got taken. Fort Sand, essentially an autonomous village of some 50 buildings, was expensive to maintain, and for years it was of little use. In the 80s, the property began serving some purpose as a summer school of the arts and the site of an occasional convention. It still operated at a huge deficit. However, the buildings began to fall in disrepair. Fort Sand was in danger of closing permanently when in 1992, Saskatchewan Property Management Corporation began negotiating with the Department of National Defence. The latter agreed to move their Western Canadian Sea Cadet training program to Echo Valley, providing a much-needed major tenant and a new lease on life. Guaranteed income from the cadets each summer finally prompted the government to refurbish the site. Today, the place has the appearance of a well-tended time capsule. Stroll down the red and green checkered tile of the hallways, past old-fashioned windows and hospital white walls, and it's easy to imagine the year is 1940. Take a moment in any of the Spartan rooms and you'll find yourself believing that just that morning, patients on hospital beds were wheeled through the broad doorways leading to the sun balconies where wide-flung windows brought them their fresh air cure. There is a sense of time being absorbed here, and according to some, more remains of the past than just old-fashioned fixtures and furniture. Over the years, Fort Sand gained a reputation as a haunted place. There were rumors of entire floors appearing to be lit up and bustling with activity, when in fact they were empty and deserted. People gossiped about patients and orderlies from a previous era roaming the halls late at night. Isolated and antique, with a dramatic history, Fort Sand was Saskatchewan's version of a ghost-ridden castle. One of the first stories I heard of Fort Sand came from a man who had attended a summer music camp there in the late 70s or early 80s. On a particularly warm day, every band member had gathered on the lawn for practice. One young man realized that he had forgotten something in his room and ran back to the deserted lodge to retrieve it. As he dug through his luggage, he was distracted by the sound of singing. It was a woman's voice, high and clear and confusing since this was the lodge assigned to the men. The voice was accompanied by the sound of running water, likely coming from the bathroom across the hall. The young musician walked over to the doorway where he could see clearly across to the line of porcelain sinks. It was a woman, young and pretty, in a rather conservative dark dress that fell past her knees. The taps were running, and as she washed, the woman dreamingly considered her reflection in the mirror. The young man called out to her politely, "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you're in the wrong lodge. This is the men's." She gave no indication of having heard him. Thinking that perhaps the running water had masked his voice, he spoke up, "Excuse me, lady." Instead of turning towards him, the woman backed away from the sink and out of his range of vision. He decided to approach her and walked the half-dozen steps across the hall to the bathroom. In that time, she had vanished. The young man was perplexed, but not frightened at first. He stood in the bathroom, trying to reason how the woman could have left his sight so quickly, how she could possibly not be in the bathroom or the hallway. As he tried in vain to puzzle it out, when he noticed next did frighten him. Every sink in the bathroom was completely dry. Apparently he rejoined his bandmates in a great hurry and refused to go back to the lodge until later that evening, when it was comfortably filled with people. I had also encountered rumors about a group of writers who had taken a Ouija board to their Fort Sand retreat. They were aware of the conference center's supernatural reputation and hoped to conjure some spiritual entertainment. What actually happened that night is difficult to know. The participants are evidently, to this day, too upset to discuss the matter. I spoke to a man who had interviewed several of the people involved, and he would only say that the writers summoned much more activity than they bargained for, and had frightened themselves badly. It seemed they may have frightened others as well. There was an alcoholics rehabilitation group booked into Fort Sand on that same evening. The story has it that these poor people were terrified sleeping two to a bed, completely unaware of what was causing the strange events around them, and probably suspecting hallucinations. I relayed these stories to General Manager Gus Vanderpolder, an affable man who made us instantly welcome. Gus found the tales interesting but not surprising. He felt that the site's historical record made an irresistible fodder for superstitious types. And to add color, of course, where there are grim statistics. On average, since 1919, 40 people died here of tuberculosis. Every year the place was open, Gus explained. So that's a fair number of people to have expired on site. And then there were a variety of other stories people tell. Those other stories, well, is Bernice Desjarles. Gus introduced the trim, pretty woman and let her perform the duty of tour guide. No one could have been a better choice. Bernice has worked at Echo Valley Conference Center for 6 years, long before she joined the housekeeping staff. However, she was a tuberculosis patient who had spent 3 of her precarious childhood years confined to the sand. "I was in here when I was 6 years old for 2 years," she said, matter-of-factly. adding later that her father had been a World War II serviceman who made it home before she did. I came back in when I was 12, she continued, that time for 10 months. Bernice went on to explain that a tubercular gland in her neck had burst during her first stay, very nearly killing her. A few years later, when her glands became swollen, she was rushed back to the sanatorium. After 10 months of separation from her family and friends, they took the little girl's tonsils out and sent her home. It had not been a reoccurrence after all. The result of those stays had been that Bernice knows every inch of every building on the site. She got us up and down polished staircases, through passageways, and past every possible point of interest. This is where the babies were kept, she advised us at one point. In another area, she showed us where staff members went when they were feeling ill. I think there are even some pills around here that are still stamped sick bay, she said. At one point, she led us into a small green-tiled room, with the shy smile that often accompanied her nuggets of personal information. Bernice revealed that this had been an operating room. This is where they took out my tonsils in '49, she confided. Bernice not only knew the landscape, she knew the legends. She informed us that Pasca Lodge was the most haunted of all the buildings, explaining that when it was a sanatorium, this lower floor is where all the very sick people lived. The treatment area was just down there, Gus offered by way of an explanation. Interestingly, while on the subject of convenience, so was the morgue. Although she had been very familiar with the facility since the 1940s, it wasn't until 4 years ago that Bernice became aware of the various ghosts. One day we were sitting having our coffee after lunch, she said, and a lady who was staying there in Pasca Lodge came in and sat down with us. She asked if we had ever seen anything. We said no, and she said, well, I've just one more night to sleep here, and I'll be happy to go home. We asked her why, and she said that at 3 o'clock that morning, they were all awakened by this noise, as though someone was dragging heavy chains and slamming heavy doors and walking up and down the hallways. The upstairs people thought it was the one downstairs, and vice versa, but nobody was doing anything, she said. Every night she would leave her door open just to watch. She was scared. She was waiting to go home, Bernice finished solemnly. One commonly seen apparition at the conference center is known as Nurse Jane, or Jane, the folding ghost. The latter title inspired by the fact that she is frequently seen folding linens. On other occasions, she seems content to push a wheelchair around the premises. According to folklore, Jane was a distraught nurse who committed suicide while working at Fort San. Hopefully she wasn't attempting to escape an unbearable job, for she now appears to have it for eternity. When tuberculosis patients were moved from one location to another, wheelchairs were always used, so as not to interfere with the prescription of rest. It's not surprising, then, that wheelchairs seem to be a common spectral theme. Bernice pointed down a long hallway in Pasca Lodge. That doorway at the end, she waved her hand, when the door was half shut. We used to see the shadow of a wheelchair on it. Ghostly shadow was apparently so distinct that it always drew someone down to investigate. By the time they reached the end of the hallway, however, the apparition would disappear. Still on a medical theme, Bernice told us of another odd experience she had decades after the building had been used as a treatment facility. One morning I came to work and I found a nurse's cap on our desk in the laundry room, she said. After asking around to see if anyone wanted to claim the cap, she eventually took it home. I thought, well, souvenir, she laughed. Thought maybe I'd wear it for Halloween. Instead, she felt strangely reluctant to keep the white cap, and took it back to work. I put it in the kitchen, she said. I don't know what became of it. Perhaps Nurse Jane reclaimed it. Another eerie incident happened in what Bernice referred to as one of the old buildings. One that has since been torn down. She had been making beds with some co-workers. and noticed on the way out of the building that a light had been left on at the end of the hallway. Bernice walked back and turned it off. By the time the girls were gone out the door, she explained, I was coming back halfway down the hallway and I heard click. I looked back, the light was on again. I didn't stay in there too long. As interesting as the stories about the former sanatorium are, people's reactions to them. Lending credibility to Bernice Jarrell's testimony is the fact that she won't enter Pasca Lodge alone, if at all possible. She is less hesitant if the place is littered with the confronting sight of people's belongings, but maintains that if working alone in Pasca Lodge were her job, she would find another one. A male employee who works nights at Echo Valley Conference Center harbors even stronger feelings. According to Gus Vanderpolder, this man is so completely unwilling to enter Pasca alone after dark, he even risked his job. Gus assigned the man a small chore to take care of in Pasca Lodge one night, and noticed 3 days later that it hadn't been attended to. When Gus questioned the man, his explanation was that he hadn't been able to find a person available to accompany him. He'll give midnight tours to a group of people, Gus added, but don't ask him to go in alone. Gus Vanderpolder's own feelings about the ghosts are interesting. He doesn't really think that anything spectral is roaming the halls. However, he's honest enough to admit that he occasionally gets spooked. Doing my personal laundry here a couple of different nights, a door would suddenly close, he said. I'd go investigate, and there'd be no one there. And there should be no one there, because the building's empty. Yet there's a slamming door. I put it down to, okay, there's a wind. I mean, I don't want to believe in ghosts. I have to work here. Whether he believes in the phenomenon or not, Gus has a great appreciation for the entertainment value of the folklore, particularly the more colorful details. On your way up here, did you pass a sign that said Stiffville? He asked with a smile. We nodded. Mr. Stiff was the undertaker that used to attend to cases here, Gus explained. Mr. Stiff may have had an unfortunate combination of name and occupation, but it was not interesting enough to earn him a place in Ripley's Believe It or Not, and respectable enough to name a nearby community. Most of the folklore is still more morbid, though. I had heard stories of tunnels connecting the buildings which were used to transport corpses in the dead of winter. Gus thought that it was unlikely, explaining that they were actually service tunnels used to maintain a network of utility pipes. Still, when I stared down one dimly lit passageway that emptied into the morgue, I felt a chill. Another common bit of hearsay was expressed as a certainty by Bernice. As we were walking past some windows on the north side of Pasca Lodge, she indicated the hills beyond. Lots of times people died here, and they had no family, she said. If nobody claimed the body, they'd get buried back there in the hills with no marker. Officially, there is no burial site on ground, yet this is one of the more persistent Fort Sand stories. Gus Vanderpolder heard of one staff member finding a skull on the property in 1992. And many people treat the unsubstantiated rumor as a simple matter of fact. The idea is a central theme in Veronica Eddie Brock's novel, The Valley of Flowers, 1987. While the book is a work of fiction, it is nonetheless rooted in truth, based on the author's own experience at Fort Sand. It is written several times in the novel that for every flower planted out by the gates, the heroine had heard that a dead body was buried back in the hills. Although this is yet to be proven as anything more than a rumor, it is impressively widespread and enduring one. But it is little wonder that the dark stories persist. Fort Sand was a medical purgatory where hundreds died and thousands suffered. Isolation, loneliness, and pain were a way of life for its citizens, some of whom lost years of their lives, if not life itself. Today, the Echo Valley Conference Center is a bustling, sunny, accommodating alter ego to the Sand, By all accounts, it is a pleasant and productive place to be. Why then the continued ghostly visitations? They used to say it about tubercular spots on x-rays. These shadows take time to chase away. This story takes place in Regina, Saskatchewan, the Ghost in Government House. Every October in Regina, troops of school children make their way to the Government House for an hour of speculation and fun. It's Halloween with Howie, an inspired program that captures the kids' imaginations while sneaking in a little history lesson on the sly. Howie, as he is known, is the legendary ghost of Government House. Children are entertained by videotaped reports of his antics, then taken on a tour of the house, stopping at points where spooky incidents have taken place. However, there are ghostly word games to play and an opportunity to make a Howie lolly out of a lollipop and a tissue. It may sound like a tame concoction of seasonal entertainment for the children, but there are many who swear that Howie is real. He has a reputation for mischief, but has never truly frightened anyone, seeming to be the spectral equivalent of a big, friendly, toothless dog, completely lovable and a threat to no one. Staff members who have worked nights in Government House claim that Howie likes to make his presence known in a number of ways. Toilets will flush, quite autonomously, when the hour is late. If you use the rear stairway, it is said that there is a strong sense of someone being there with you. Doors have been seen unlatching and swinging open, and it has become routine to have something disappear from its usual place, only to reappear days later. Keeping track of Howie's pranks is only part of the fun. However, in a building that boasts the dramatic history of Government House, it is equally intriguing to speculate about the Phantom's identity. In a Halloween with Howie teacher guide, Bob Burke, a former historian for Government House heritage property, shared some of his theories. Burke felt that Howie might have been a previous governor who had taken out a spiritual lease on his former residence. Perhaps he was one of the many soldiers who convalesced there after the war. And considering the possibility that Howie could be a female, he wondered if they weren't dealing with the spirit of a former chambermaid. That would explain the occasional unexplained spots of cleaning and polishing that had been found around the house. The most widely accepted explanation, however, concerns a Chinese cook named Chen, who worked for Lieutenant Governor Archibald McNabb in the 1940s. Chen contracted pneumonia while in residence and died in a back room of the house. It wasn't long after that the staff began hearing the whispery sounds of Chen's slippers roaming about the servants' quarters at night. No matter how Howie was in his earthly existence, in his spiritual form, he has become a beloved fixture of Government House. Bob Burke, in the Halloween with Howie teacher guide, expressed the sentiment best. We have become accustomed to his mischievous ways and rather enjoy them. Howie has entered our lives and made a permanent place in our hearts. If one day Howie were to depart for other realms, Government House would never quite be the same. Something wonderful would have passed from our lives. And so Saskatchewan's best-loved ghost continues to live the high life in the stately mansion that is Government House. These stories take place in southern Saskatchewan. Foolish fire. Late one night, a southern Saskatchewan farmer notices lights moving about in the neighboring farmyard, which he knows to be deserted. He drives over to investigate and is perplexed when he arrives to find no lights, no apparent source of light, and most strangely, no tracks in the freshly fallen snow. Over a period of decades, several people in the Wapala district report a phantom lantern that follows them late at night. There is no threat of a chase. Instead, the light acts as an escort, keeping a comfortable distance away and disappearing once the person is safe at home. In the rural area outside of Yorkton, A group of men wait patiently at a crossroad for their friend, whose lantern they can see in the distance. The lantern light grows brighter as it approaches, and they urge the man to hurry lest they be late reaching their destination. The bobbing light draws closer, and the men prepare to greet their friend. Instead, they freeze in shock as the lantern they have been watching passes them between them and moves on. No one is carrying it. These are a few examples of the many and varied experiences human beings have had with phantom lights. Although they haven't been studied until recently, awareness of this mysterious phenomenon goes back centuries. Generally, early societies created explanations to fit their spiritual belief system. The Snohomish Indians described the lights as doors to other worlds. The Yakima thought they could divine the future, and Australian Aborigines, who called them Min lights, believed they were manifestation of dead or evil spirits. Whatever they may be, over the years, Saskatchewanians have reported an alarming number of them. At Woodlawn Cemetery in Saskatoon, on several consecutive mornings in the late 1960s, murky orange lights have witnessed floating above ground and darting in and out of the trees. There appeared to be no logical explanation. Much further north is Candle Lake, named by the Cree Indians, who frequently witnessed an inexplainable light dancing above the water's surface. The glow is always seen in the direction of the North Shore, which is the site of a native burial ground. The Cree believed the area to be haunted and never settled there. Several phantom lights, including the ones at Woodlawn Cemetery, Candle Lake, and the famous Tabor Light, seem connected to graveyards or burial grounds. Other eschew traditional cemeteries, but still act as luminescent markers at scenes of foul play or accident. In a story reminiscent of the St. Louis ghost train, some residents of Saskatoon claim they have seen a phantom locomotive light along the Grand Trunk line south of Diefenbaker Park. Also mimicking the St. Louis legend is the suspected cause. An engineer was killed decades ago in a derailment. In the small community of Watson, they tell a story of a light that appears over a murdered man's grave, signaling that he is not at rest in the dry Borough Lake. A ghost light haunts the area where a lone rancher disappeared before the turn of century. Folklore has it that the man had gone into Assiniboia that day and sold all his stock. He apparently returned to his ranch but was never seen or heard of again. That night his shack burned to the ground, but no trace of the rancher's body was discovered in the smoldering ruins. For decades afterwards, Dryboro Lake was home to a dancing phantom light, which always appeared within 1 mile radius of the rancher's home. Much rarer is the phenomenal lights that seem to serve some premonitory purpose. In September of 1938, Trans-Canada Airlines pilot Captain David Imrie made a strange sighting as he flew the night mail between Regina and Moose Jaw. What he saw appeared to be the navigation lights of an aircraft, but no such craft was flying that route on that night. Sadly, only a few weeks after seeing the ghost plane, Captain Imrie himself died in a plane crash. 46 years earlier, Dan Mackenzie, witnessing a similarly foretold tragedy, take place 9 miles south of Whitewood. It was a dark night, and Dan and his friend, Bob McCaw, were laying on the grass in Dan's front yard. They noticed a bright light traveling towards them from the east. Initially thinking it was a friend, they got up and walked towards what they thought was his lantern. At that point, the light traveled back the way it came. The light zigged and zagged a bit, always staying about 100 yards in front of the two men. Eventually, it led them to Bob's father's house. There it perched on the log stable while Bob and Dan went inside. Somewhat unsettled and glad to be rid of their strange chaperone, moments after the men arrived, Bob's sister Lizzie asked them to go to Whitewood and fetch the doctor. It seemed that 10-year-old Sarah, the youngest McCaw sibling, was very ill. Bob hitched a horse to his father's buckboard and went for help. When he returned from his 18-mile round trip with the doctor, he noticed that the light was still atop the log stable. There it remained until later that night, when little Sarah died. It is interesting to note that although phantom lights appear at a variety of locations, and seemingly for a variety of reasons, there are certain common characteristics. Generally speaking, they are found only in remote areas. With rare exceptions, they remain at a distance from the viewer and will often react to noises or other sources of light by drawing further away or disappearing altogether. Likely the most fascinating common quality of those lights is that they appear to some form of consciousness or intelligence. They react to the movements of those who watch them, sometimes seeming to play games. There are naturally a number of scientific theories that attempt to explain phantom lights. In many cases, there might be a source of light that can't be seen from the vantage point of the viewer, perhaps a train or automobile. The light might be reflected from a distance. Another possible cause is marsh gas, which is created by decaying organic matter and is combustible. In some parts of the world, researchers are even investigating seismic stresses between the Earth of a cause, theorizing that they release small masses of iodized gas into the atmosphere near fault lines. There are no logical explanations, however, for the reactive behavior of so many of the lights. While it seems reasonable to accept that decaying organic matter in a cemetery may create a phosphorescent reaction, it is difficult to say how the seemingly natural globe of light can engage in a lively game of hide-and-seek among the trees. The one certainty is this: Saskatchewan is full of these glowing mysteries. Whether they are natural or supernatural origin remains to be proven, but hundreds of witnesses make it difficult to deny that they truly do exist. With that in mind, it may be time to pay attention to the brave types who say there is no need to fear the dark. As a cautious alternative, however, let's keep a close eye on the light. This story takes place at Old Wife's Lake, Saskatchewan. The legend of Old Wife's Lake. It is the legend of Old Wife's Lake, part of the oral history of the Plains Indians. The story is that 3 elderly Assiniboine women were trying to escape from a raiding party of Blackfoot. They ran until they came to the edge of the lake, then tried in vain to swim to its far shore. Tragically, they were drowned. From that point forward, according to legend, their wails of torment were heard across the waters at night. Because of this sad story, Old Wife's Lake was what this water had always been called. At some point, for reasons unknown, the name was officially changed to Lake Johnstone. In 1963, the original title, in keeping with the legend, was restored. Some 20 years later, however, the shallow body of the Alklick water fell victim to some of the prairie's driest years. The lake began to evaporate, leaving wide expanses of salt flats behind. Today, the bleached and barren lake bed has a grim post-apocalyptic appearance. Each puff of air is white with salt, and nothing grows on the shores but scrubby brown thistle. It's a lifeless sight, but when the wind blows, one has to listen. There is something mournful in the sound, something vaguely haunting. Old Wife's Lake may be a mere ghost of its former self, but the legend lives on.